Hi guys, and welcome back to Higher Hertz. My name's Justin Leopard, your online cello teacher, and today I want to tackle a subject that can be wary, make even the most experienced musicians wary, but it's so important to playing music better, and it's actually not that hard once you get into it, once you realize that, like cello, music theory is a process that you can engage with and have fun with. So let's start by talking about what is music theory. Music theory is everything that's not the music itself that can be used to explain what's going on with the music. A good binary to think about is that there's music theory and there's music practice. So when we're doing music practice, we're actually trying to play music, perform music, record music, maybe even composing music, although that's probably more of a mix of the two. When we're analyzing music, when we are talking to each other about music, when we are trying to figure out how to perform music better, we're engaging with music theory. Things that are not the actual performance or the practice of music, but the things that are going on behind the scenes. Examples of music theory include knowing what chords are in a song. This is an example of music theory and not practice, because while the guitar player might be able to tell you what chords they're playing, a lot of information is lost if you don't understand what voicing of the chord, which is to say in which octave the specific notes were. It's also missing the context. What was going on rhythmically? What was going on with the other instruments? I mean, there's so many things going on with music at any given moment. That's what, it's hard to decipher exactly what we latch onto emotionally about one song versus another, but I can tell you right now, if you've ever picked up a chord book and then tried to play a song just based off the chords alone, you're like, is this even the song? Now, sometimes it's because they're not that good of arrangements or transcriptions of the song or whatever, but it's really because the chords are an incomplete part of the story. But they are nonetheless a way of looking at what's going on in the music, and they're part of music theory. Another way we could look at music theory would be to look at what the form or the structure of the song is. What sections does it have after which section? That's a very important part of music analysis, where we look at music theory in order to improve something about music performance, unless we're just theorists and want to write about it, and that's our end goal, teach about it. The primary modes by which we analyze music are going to be pitches and rhythm. This is true at least in a Western music context. In other parts of the world, other things might take more precedence, and I think for a lot of people specifically, tone and timbre matter a lot, which is why it matters to you, the dear viewer who's trying to learn cello, that you're learning cello and not tuba, because it sounds different. You can play the same notes and the same rhythms on tuba, and it's a different experience. So I would argue timbre is an extremely important part. You can also potentially abstract articulations and things like that, but usually those sort of things are seen as still the performance side of music, even if it's analytical to decide what articulation you're using. Okay, so we're talking about primarily what can be analyzed by looking at rhythms, at pitches, harmonies, melodies, chords, and structures of songs. That's a lot of what music theory is. So there's a lot of different ways you can engage with this. One way you can engage with it is to take a piece of music and try to figure out what chords are going on. Now, one thing to remember about chords, and I don't mean to harp on chords here, but chords are taken for granted nowadays. I had to go through an epiphany when I learned that in Baroque times, chords were like barely even seen of as their own thing. It would happen that overlapping voices would have notes ringing simultaneously, and there was a notation that described relative to the bass note of the music what the rest of the chord notes in the chord were. This was called figured bass, but these weren't necessarily chord symbols. These were just instructions as to how to extrapolate the rest of the notes on any given bass note. I mean, it didn't even have to do with the chord per se, because if the bass is playing G, it doesn't even have to be a G chord. The figured bass is notated off of it anyway. So chords were something that kind of came along later, right? They started from individual voices and then they came along later. So what does this mean? It means that when we look at music, it's not always completely identifiable what the chord is, especially classical music. And if you watched our video talking about how to learn Bach, I talked about how the rolled chords on the cello are actually different voices, but it's not always that obvious. Sometimes you have disparate notes. And this is why it's really good to learn how to identify triads. So triads are the most fundamental aspect of a chord. Every chord, every major or minor chord has three notes that primarily define it. The root note or the main note. So if we're in G major, the main note's G. The third, which is 2 scale degrees above it, the third scale degree of it. So in the case of G major, it's B natural. In the case of G minor, it's B flat. And then the fifth, which is usually a perfect fifth, which just means that it's, one string over for us cellists. That's what it means. But sometimes it can also be a flat 5 if it's in a diminished chord, or a sharp 5 if it's an augmented chord. Now, when you just hear these chords in, the names themselves, they can sound like, I don't really care about what that is. That's just a word. And if you hear the chords in passing, you might not even know to think anything special about them. But this is why music theory is really powerful, because it gives us a language to understand that isn't just something that sounds kind of like, whoa, that was a little more out there. That was a little bit more questioning. Well, why? It's augmented. I didn't have to think questioning before I played that. All I did was play an augmented arpeggio, and it sort of intrinsically has that feeling to it. If we go switch from major to minor, that has a feeling associated with it. And so music theory, when you start to extrapolate the chords from the music that you're playing by recognizing, as you look at different notes, what is most likely the chord triad going on, and remembering that with most music there's going to be like 1 chord to a bar, or maybe 2 chords to a bar, some sort of regular harmonic motion, it's called, the movement from one chord to another over the bar, the rhythm of that's the harmonic rhythm. That's going to be probably pretty stable. Once you start to figure it out, you can start to maybe identify patterns, maybe realize just a new layer of awareness of what's going on as you play these chords. Because especially if you're able to find another way of playing the chords alone, like maybe go to the piano and try to play the chords, you're going to have an intrinsic sort of reaction to what those chords are. I guarantee some sort of reaction intrinsically to what those chords are. And then when you come back to the cello, it's like, all right, that's already what the chord means. It can also be really helpful to analyze form, the structure of the music that you're playing. If you're stuck, only looking at the notes themselves and not being able to abstract these bigger picture things, you could be left feeling like when you just look at the music is somehow completely different from, because it didn't have as many notes printed and it doesn't speak to you. But it's exactly the same thing, just with some chords attached to it. So of course it matters to realize the continuity there. And when you start to just dig in, this is why I don't think music theory needs to be scary. It's scary if you're taking a test and you're worried about getting everything right, and it can just be hard to figure it out. But if you just engage with it a little bit and you're practicing music, it will help you a lot. Any amount you do will help you, because you're going to learn something new about what makes the music work. There is a practical side to music theory as well, and it's called aural skills, spelled A-U-R-A-L, not oral, O-R-A-L. But aural skills is your listening ability. So if just by listening you're able to tell, oh, I know what that chord is, that progression, that interval. And that, of course, is a very important part of being a musician, because you're able to hear what other musicians are doing, adapt your own playing quicker, learn the music quicker, internalize the music quicker. So it's very valuable. For specifics on things that you can practice, just look up music theory and aural skills training, and there's exercises that you can do on a lot of different websites. I'll link to a couple below. And I highly recommend you go try those out and actually learn your skills and apply them to your pieces. Hopefully this video was less of technical instruction as to how to music theorize, but more of a helpful overview for what music theory can do for you as a cellist, how to approach it, how to think of it, just to know what it is. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you've been enjoying your cello learning journey with us here at Higher Hertz. Make sure to subscribe below if you haven't already. Hit the bell for notifications. We're uploading lessons all the time. We want to help you guys learn. Let us know in the comments if you have any specific questions or what you think. Once again, I'm Justin Leopard. You can find my playing at the Vagabond Cellist. We hope to see you guys in the next video here. Well, until then, have a good one.